I'm Harlan, 36, a maintenance supervisor from Franklin, Tennessee. At her graduation, my sister turned and said, "You don't belong here." 6 years of tuition, rent, and groceries. Over $10,000 gone like I was just a receipt she'd already thrown away. And yet, as the applause echoed behind those ballroom doors, all I could smell was the cold lemon polish on the floor I wasn't welcome to walk. If you've ever been erased by your own blood, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? The envelope was heavier than it should have been. Cream-colored, embossed in gold, it sat on the kitchen table like it belonged more than I ever had. Oakwell Hall. The front read in cursive, so delicate, I nearly missed the sting beneath it. There was no greeting, no note, just a printed itinerary and a seat number. My name wasn't on anything, but the moment I saw Savannah's name in bolds at the top, Dr. Savannah Ridgway, class of 2025, I knew. Emily stood at the counter, sealing Sophie's lunchbox with a practiced hand. "You're up early?" she said, not turning around. "Is that what came in the mail yesterday?" I nodded, then cleared my throat. "It's a graduation invitation." She turned to look at me, eyes soft, but sharp enough to see right through me. "For you?" I hesitated. Number for whoever's proud of her, I guess. Outside, the wind carried that early spring chill only Tennessee seems to master. It scratched lightly at the windows, polite but persistent. Inside, something colder sat in my chest. It wasn't the first time I felt like a guest in my own family. But something about this envelope, its weight, its elegance, its omission, made it worse. Like I was expected to know my place, and that place wasn't anywhere near Oakwell Hall. Emily reached for a thermos and passed it to me gently. "So, are you going?" I didn't answer. I just stared at the paper, still unfolded on the table. After all these years, after everything I did, shouldn't I at least be on the list? She leaned her hip against the counter, arms crossed. "If you don't go, you'll regret it. And if you do, maybe you'll stop letting them write you out of the story." Her voice was calm, steady. But beneath that, I heard the ache of watching me shrink myself, year after year. I walked down the hallway into my small home office, pulled open the bottom drawer. A thin folder rested inside, labeled in my own handwriting, "Savannah, Med School." I placed it on the desk and opened it. Receipts, bank transfers, printed tuition statements. The numbers stared back at me. $8,120 in tuition over 2 years at the community college. Then another $12,000 after she transferred. Rent payments, grocery deliveries, medical textbooks I never understood the titles of. Over $10,000 in just the last few years. More if you count the little extras. The emergencies, the late-night Venmo requests. And not once had I asked for anything in return. I ran a finger down one of the itemized lists, where I had scrawled in red pen, February 12th, $400 for housing shortfall. The penmanship looked anxious, like it had been written in a rush, half guilt, half duty. I wasn't proud. I didn't feel noble. I felt erased. Like I had spent years building a bridge only to watch it be walked over without a glance back. Like I'd constructed a monument with my name missing from the plaque. Back in the kitchen, Sophie had finished her cereal and was humming softly while tying her shoes. Emily handed her a jacket, then looked at me. "You don't have to prove anything to them," she said. "But maybe this time, you just show up for yourself." That stuck. I placed the invitation back into its envelope, tucked it into my coat pocket. Then I looked at the kitchen clock. The day was just starting, but something inside me had already shifted. "I'll go," I said. My voice didn't sound angry or sure, just final, like a door closing, but gently. Emily looked at me. "And if they say you're not welcome?" I didn't have an answer. Maybe I didn't need one. Not yet. But I knew this. Sometimes silence becomes too heavy to carry. And when it finally breaks, it's not with a shout. It's with a step. One foot in front of the other. Toward the door. Toward Oakwell Hall. The envelope was still on the table when I left for work that morning. The same table where we'd celebrated Sophie's birthday last year with store-bought cake and construction paper crowns. Funny how something as small as a folded card could feel heavier than a tool belt full of steel and wrenches. I slid into my truck, turned the key, and pulled away from our little duplex on Bellevue Lane. The sky was that shade of gray Tennessee wears like an old coat in early spring. Familiar, faded, not yet ready to give up winter. My route to work took me past the house I still paid taxes on, my parents' house. The one with the sagging porch swing and the hydrangeas Mom never could keep alive. It was the same house where Savannah and I grew up, though the version of growing up meant different things for each of us. As I rolled by, a memory pressed itself into the front of my mind. Uninvited, but firm. I was 14, lugging my science fair project through the front door. Savannah was 4, trailing behind me in mismatched socks, holding a glitter-covered poster board she hadn't made. Mom had bent down and kissed the top of her head. "My little light," she'd said, brushing glitter from her bangs. "You're going to shine so bright." She hadn't looked at me. She hadn't needed to. I already knew my role. Carry the project, close the door, stay quiet. I don't remember what I won that day. But I remember the sound of her voice when she said those words to Savannah. And I remember wondering, just for a second, if I had ever been anybody's light. At work, I replaced a broken water heater in the cafeteria kitchen. The steam that hissed from the valve filled the air with the smell of metal and damp towels. I worked in silence, like I always did. Nobody asked me why I looked tired or why I hadn't eaten lunch. They never had. Later that night, after Sophie went to bed, Emily and I ate dinner in front of the TV. We weren't watching anything, just letting the noise fill the quiet. Out of nowhere, I asked, "Do you remember that dinner at Mom's last year?" Emily nodded without looking up. "The one where your mother made the toast?" I said nothing. I didn't need to. She knew which one I meant. Mom had stood up that evening, wine glass in hand, smiling like Savannah had just won the Nobel Prize. "To the pride of the Ridgeways," she said, "our future doctor." Then she'd turned to me and added, almost as an afterthought, "And Harlan, our steady one. Always in the background, just how we need him." It was the "just how we need him" that stung. Like being invisible was a role I was born into, not something I'd chosen. I had smiled. I had even cut the steak on my plate like nothing happened. Because that's what steady people do, right? They don't make scenes. They don't interrupt the celebration. They hold the camera and take the photo. But I hadn't missed the way Sophie looked at me from across the table. Her brow furrowed. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. She was 8, and even at 8, she knew something was off. Back then, I didn't say anything to her. I just kissed her goodnight and told her I was proud of her for finishing her spelling test strong. But now I wonder, did she think that quiet was what love looked like? The next morning, she helped Emily pack her backpack. "Why do I have to walk?" she grumbled, half asleep. Emily said gently, "Because Daddy's going in early today." Sophie looked at me with those brown eyes that mirrored my own. "Can't Aunt Savannah take me one day?" Emily didn't answer, and neither did I. At work, a co-worker named Terry passed by and said, "Heard your sister's graduating med school. Bet your folks are proud." I nodded. "Yeah, they've always been." He laughed. "Must run in the family." I didn't correct him. That night, after we put Sophie to bed, Emily poured us both a cup of tea and sat across from me. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm fine." "No," she said. "You're used to this. That's different." I stared at the tea bag floating in my cup. I guess I just don't want Sophie growing up thinking this is how things are supposed to be. Emily set her cup down and folded her arms. "Let me ask you something then." I looked up. "What would you do?" she said slowly. "If someone treated Sophie the way they've treated you?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I imagined Sophie 10 years from now, sitting across a table while someone praised her sibling and called her steady, like that was all she'd ever be. I imagined her smiling through it, pretending she didn't notice. And suddenly, the silence I'd always thought was noble felt like a burden I'd strapped onto her little back. "I'd never let that happen," I said, almost before I knew the words were coming out. Emily nodded once. "Then maybe it's time you stop letting it happen to you." The envelope still sat on the table, untouched, waiting. The week of Sophie's birthday, I sent the text without overthinking it. "We'd love to have you. Sophie really misses you." I didn't expect much, but I held out hope, like someone tossing a letter into the wind, just in case the wind cared enough to carry it. Savannah replied an hour later. "Wish I could. Medical conference in Atlanta. Can't skip it. Love you guys." I read it 3 times. There was a little heart emoji at the end. For a second, I almost smiled. Then I showed it to Emily. "She's not coming," I said, trying to sound like it didn't matter. Emily looked at the screen and said nothing, just gave me that small, unreadable look she saves for when things aren't worth arguing about. I believed Savannah. Of course I did. I told myself, she's busy. She's important now. Conferences, papers, people to impress. It's not personal. But Sophie didn't know any of that. The day of her party, Sophie wore the dress Emily had sewn herself, a light purple thing with little white daisies embroidered near the collar. She spun in it twice before we left for the community center, her curls bouncing, cheeks already flushed with excitement. "Will Aunt Savannah be there?" she asked, tying the last ribbon on the gift bags. "She said she's really busy," I told her, "but she loves you." She nodded just once and went back to her balloons. I caught the way Emily looked at me. I didn't return it. The party was simple. Paper streamers, juice boxes, a homemade cake that tilted slightly to the left. Sophie didn't seem to care. She laughed when the kids tried to pin the tail on the unicorn. She hugged every friend who brought a card. She even thanked the one who spilled punch on her dress. The only thing she didn't do was ask about Savannah again. That night, after Emily and I finished wiping frosting off the chairs and folding up the rented tables, I collapsed onto the couch. My back ached. My knees reminded me that I wasn't 30 anymore. But something else pressed heavier on my chest. I opened my phone. Pure habit. A scroll to unwind. First image. Savannah. Beach. Florida. Wearing oversized sunglasses, toes buried in the sand, a glass of champagne in one hand. Caption. Nothing like a girl's weekend to recharge. I didn't blink for a full 5 seconds. I tapped the photo once to check the location. Clearwater Beach, posted just 3 hours ago. I swiped again, More images. Her with a group of friends, shopping bags from stores I didn't recognize, a spa selfie with the words, "Earned it," scrawled in the corner, and that little heart emoji again. Not Atlanta, not a conference, not even a half-hearted excuse. Just a lie. My thumb hovered over the post. I wanted to pretend it didn't hurt, that I was too old or too used to being forgotten to let it sting. But the pain wasn't for me. It was for Sophie, who had spent half the party sneaking glances at the door, waiting for a surprise that wasn't coming, who had tied each favor bag with a little thank you card just in case Aunt Savannah shows up. The phone grew heavier in my hand, not because of what I saw, but because of the image that wasn't posted. My daughter, standing in a handmade dress in a rented room with bent folding chairs, looking out the window with too much hope. I locked the screen, then unlocked it. I stared at the post again. My thumb moved slowly, then deleted it from my history. It was still there, of course, on her profile, for all the world to love and double tap. But I couldn't look at it again. Not now. Emily found me sitting in the dark, a half-finished cup of tea still steaming on the coffee table. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just said, "You okay?" I turned the phone toward her, showed her the picture, watched her eyes narrow slightly, her jaw stiffen just enough to let me know I wasn't the only one feeling it. She handed the phone back, then sat down beside me without a word. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Some silences are heavy with sadness. Others are full of something sharper, something that edges close to anger but never quite arrives. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. The glow of the hallway light slipped across the floor like a second-hand apology. In that moment, something in me shifted. Not like an explosion, but like a floorboard creaking in an empty house. A quiet sound, but you remember it. You feel it long after. 2 weeks passed like fog. Not heavy, but lingering. On the morning of the graduation, I stood outside Oakwell Hall and felt the wind brush past my collar. Wet with spring rain, perfumed faintly by the flower arrangements flanking the grand entrance. I wore the only suit I owned, navy blue, just a touch too tight in the shoulders. Emily had pressed it the night before without saying a word. Sophie had tucked a paper flower into my inside pocket when I wasn't looking. Inside my coat was the envelope. Still clean, still official, as if it could pass for proof that I belonged. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and soft jazz. A crowd of proud parents clutched programs, balloons, and floral boxes. Everyone moved with a kind of purpose, like this day confirmed something they believed all along. I approached the registration table. A young woman smiled at me with polite efficiency. "Name, please?" "Harlan Ridgway." She scanned the list in front of her. Once, then again. Her eyes didn't change. "I'm sorry, you're not listed under family." I reached into my coat and pulled out the envelope. "This came in the mail," I said, placing it gently on the table. She hesitated, took the invitation. Her expression shifted, not with understanding, but discomfort. "You'll have to wait a moment. Let me check with someone." That's when I heard it. "Excuse me." I turned. Savannah stood 10 feet away in a white dress and soft curls, lips painted just enough to look effortless. Her eyes met mine, and not with warmth. "What are you doing here?" she asked. I blinked. "You invited me?" "No, I didn't." She glanced at the envelope in the woman's hand. "That wasn't meant to be sent. It was a courtesy badge. You must have misunderstood." I felt the air shift. People nearby glanced over, as people do when tension rises just enough to smell but not to name. Before I could speak, another voice joined the space. "Savannah," Mom said, stepping forward from a small group near the staircase. She looked just as I remembered, polished, composed, and miles away from the woman who used to pack our lunches in mismatched containers. She looked at me with cool distance. "This isn't for you, Harlan," she said. "Your role was to get her here, not to stand beside her." I opened my mouth, but nothing came. Savannah's voice followed, soft enough to almost be kind if it weren't sharpened by certainty. "You don't belong here." The words didn't hit like a slap. They didn't need to. They sank, slow and precise, like a stone dropped in still water. In my hand was a small box. Inside, a pen, engraved, polished, wrapped in tissue. I had bought it with overtime pay and skipped lunches. It was supposed to be something meaningful, a gesture, a thread. Now it felt like a joke. I closed my fingers around it and nodded. Got it. No bitterness, no protest, just a simple acknowledgement, like I'd missed my cue and the show had already moved on. I turned away, feet moving before my heart caught up. I walked toward the lounge without looking back, past the marble pillars, past the people I didn't know, past the thin, invisible line between family and not. The hotel lounge was nearly empty, dim with the early afternoon light filtered through heavy curtains. I found a chair in the corner and sat down, the box still in my hand. I didn't open it. I didn't feel angry. That would have taken energy. What I felt was quieter. Numb, maybe. Or something like it. I imagined Sophie, somewhere at home, probably drawing, probably humming. I thought of what she might ask when I got back. Whether Aunt Savannah had liked her gift, whether she had said anything kind. I would have to find a way to answer her that wasn't a lie, but also wasn't another weight for her to carry. Behind me, through the thick hotel walls, I heard applause start to rise. A name was called. Her name. I didn't turn around. Because whatever they were clapping for in that ballroom, it wasn't me. The music leaked in through the hotel's walls like water through an old pipe, soft, distant, but constant. From where I sat in the lounge, the applause from the ballroom sounded less like celebration and more like a memory I couldn't quite place. I held the box in my hands, light but not really. Inside, the pen rested on dark velvet, silver trim, matte black body, engraved with one line, Dr. Savannah Ridgway. I'd picked it out months ago, paid for it with 3 overtime shifts and 2 skipped lunches. It wasn't flashy, but it was solid. The kind of gift someone might keep in a drawer for decades, or at least pretend to. Now it just looked like a prop from a scene I'd never been cast in. The lounge was mostly empty. Just me, the bartender wiping down glasses, and a couple in the corner clinking champagne flutes, whispering the way people do when they're on the edge of something new. I wasn't on the edge of anything. I was just trying not to fall back into something old. The bartender glanced over. "You from the med school crowd?" I looked at him. He couldn't have been more than 25, with a crisp white apron and that kind of earnest politeness they teach at hotels with valet service. "Not exactly," I said. "I helped someone get there." He gave a half smile, the kind that says, "I don't get it, but I won't ask." I nodded at the drink menu. "Just coffee." He poured without a word. I sat back, letting the hum of the espresso machine fill the quiet. My phone buzzed once in my pocket, then stopped. Probably Emily. I didn't check. Instead, I opened my photos, scrolled past Sophie's drawings, Emily's birthday cake, a blurry shot of our backyard in last fall's light. Then I opened my banking app, entered the password. It was all still there. Digital echoes of every month I said yes while my own bills waited in silence. Tuition receipts, rent transfers, grocery top-ups, textbooks, clinic fees, even an Uber ride she forgot to cancel. 6 years of being the safety net no one applauded. Total, $10,378. And change. No thank you, no acknowledgement. Just the unspoken assumption that this is what brothers do. A strange calm settled in my chest. Not the kind that comes from peace. The kind that comes from finally seeing the whole picture. I whispered, not loud enough for anyone else. They said I don't belong. A pause. A breath. Maybe I should tell them why I ever did. I stood. The pen still in its box. Still perfect. Still unused. I walked to the bar, placed the box gently on the counter. The bartender raised an eyebrow. "It's for someone in the ballroom," I said. "They'll know who it's from." Then I walked away. My steps felt lighter than they had all day. Maybe all year. Like I'd finally stopped carrying something that was never mine to begin with. Outside the ballroom doors, the crowd buzzed louder. Laughter, announcements, names read off like royalty. A man in a dark suit stepped forward, earpiece, clipboard, the whole bit. "Excuse me," he said. "Ballroom access is for family and registered guests only." I looked him in the eye. "I'm not here for the list." The ballroom lights had dimmed. A soft wash of gold highlighted the stage, and rows of neatly pressed families leaned forward in their chairs, waiting for affirmation in the form of applause. Dean Harold Myers stood at the podium. His voice was even, his presence unshakable. "Behind every graduate," he said, "is a team of believers. Some visible, some not." The room hushed, respectful, hanging on the final word. I stood at the edge of the light, right where the hallway met the grand double doors, the line between being in and being out. My palms were dry. That surprised me. I wasn't shaking, not like I used to during presentations in high school, not like when I sat in waiting rooms to hear test results for Savannah's applications or watched my bank balance hover just above zero. This wasn't fear. This was something colder, clearer. I stepped forward. The MC, a young man in a tuxedo 2 sizes too small, looked at me with confusion as I approached. "I'd like to say a few words," I said quietly. "Just a moment." He blinked, then looked toward Dean Myers, who paused, studied me from the stage, and offered a single nod. I walked up the steps, not slowly, not fast. Just enough to feel the floor beneath me. I took the mic as the room stilled into that thin kind of silence. The kind people mistake for politeness, but is really just uncertainty. I didn't adjust the mic. I didn't clear my throat. I just spoke. "Good evening. My name is Harlan Ridgway. I'm the brother of the graduate you're honoring tonight." A few heads turned. Some of the faculty looked down at their programs. One woman in the front row squinted like she was trying to place me. "I won't take long," I said. "But there's something I'd like to say. Not because I want attention, but because for 6 years I gave everything I had without ever asking to be seen." I paused. 6 years ago, I took out a second mortgage on my house to help my sister through medical school. I worked overtime, skipped holidays, paid her rent, her bills, her textbooks, because I believed in her future. Not once did I ask for a thank you. Not once did I ask for credit. I let the silence settle. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was necessary. But today, I continued, I was told I didn't belong here. There were murmurs now, the kind that pass like ripples, not loud, but restless. So I'm here to say, I met their eyes, not accusing, just present. I did. I handed the mic back. No one clapped, but no one laughed either, and that somehow was enough. I stepped off the stage as Dean Myers took his place again, nodding once at me before turning back to the crowd. No one followed me as I left. The applause resumed behind me, timed perfectly with Savannah's name being read, her photo flashing on the screen above the stage, smiling, poised, untouched by the moment that had just passed. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly. Dean Myers approached, walking with the quiet authority of someone who had stood behind hundreds of podiums and yet still understood when it mattered most to say something directly. "Mr. Ridgway," he said, voice low but warm. That took something most people spend a lifetime running from. I didn't respond. He added, "Sometimes the ones in the background carry more weight than anyone ever knows." I nodded, barely. He placed a hand on my shoulder, then walked back into the ballroom. I didn't go back in. Instead, I took the elevator down, stepped outside into the chilled dusk air, and walked 3 blocks to where my truck was parked. No valet, no parking fee. Just me, a faded windshield, and a dashboard that creaked on cold nights. When I got home, the lights were low. Emily was folding laundry on the couch. Sophie was asleep upstairs. I didn't say anything. I walked into the small room we called my office, pulled open the cabinet on the bottom shelf, and took out the thickest folder I owned. The label was written in my handwriting, a little smudged from years of pulling it in and out. House, Ridgway. It was time to open that too. The house on Sycamore Street had always been more memory than structure. White siding worn thin by decades of storms, porch railings chipped where Dad used to rest his coffee mug, and that same uneven front step that had tripped me every summer growing up, even after I stopped running. Mom still lived there. But the name on the tax bills, the maintenance reports, the city citations, that had been mine for 6 years. I hadn't been inside since Dad's funeral, not once. That night, I sat at our own kitchen table, quiet, small, still warm from dinner, and stared at the manila folder in front of me. It had been in the bottom drawer of the file cabinet for years, growing fatter, heavier. Paper doesn't get tired the way people do, but this folder was close. Emily placed 2 mugs of tea on the table. She didn't speak, just sat down across from me, hands wrapped around her cup. Mine sat untouched. Cooling, I opened the folder. First page, mortgage documents, then the tax statements, utility bills from a house I didn't live in, plumbing repair estimates from the year the basement flooded and no one thought to tell me until the city fined us. Every single document had my name, every responsibility, every dollar, every signature. I flipped slowly through them, the paper soft from handling. Some pages had my notes in the margins. Others had been folded, unfolded, and folded again. All of them carried weight, but none of them had ever been acknowledged. Emily finally broke the silence. "You sure you want to do this tonight?" I nodded, still looking at the papers. I used to think keeping up that house was my way of holding the family together. She leaned forward slightly. And now? I stared at the page in front of me. Now I think it was just a way to keep the past from slipping away, even when it didn't want me anymore. Her face softened, but she didn't try to stop me. Instead, she asked the question she always did when it mattered. "Are you sure?" I thought of Sophie's drawing still taped to the refrigerator. 3 stick figures, all smiling, holding hands in front of a crooked little house. That's the home I wanted to protect now. I reached for my phone and pulled up the contact. Clara Pennington. Clara had been our neighbor back on Sycamore when we were kids. She used to babysit Savannah and me on summer afternoons. Now she was an attorney, mostly small-time property and civil disputes. But she knew the town. She knew my family. The phone rang twice. "Harlan," she answered, as if she'd been expecting me. "What can I do for you?" I didn't stall. "Clara, I want to file a formal notice to vacate the Sycamore property." There was a pause. Not hesitation, but calculation. "I've got everything documented," I continued. "Mortgage, tax payments, maintenance, 6 years' worth. All in my name. And I'm done carrying it alone." Her voice came through clear and even. "I'll need you to scan and send it all. But if it checks out, and I trust it will, you have full legal standing." I exhaled. Didn't realize I'd been holding my breath. "I'll draft the notice this week," she added. "Certified delivery. That gives them 30 days to respond before we escalate." "Thanks, Clara." She was quiet for a beat, then said gently, "Don't thank me yet. These things rarely go quietly." I nodded, knowing she couldn't see it. They haven't been quiet in years. When the call ended, I sat still for a long moment. I waited for something to rise. Guilt, anxiety, maybe shame. The emotions that usually followed any step I took without my family's approval. But nothing came. No storm, no sting. Just stillness. I looked up at Emily. She reached across the table and took my hand, her thumb moving lightly over mine. "You okay?" I searched for the answer, then said, "I think so." It doesn't feel like cutting them off. It feels like opening a door I've kept locked for too long. We stayed there, not talking, not filling the room with noise, just letting it be what it was. A quiet crossing from obligation into choice. The fridge hummed. Outside, wind brushed against the siding. Somewhere, Sophie turned in her sleep upstairs. Then my phone lit up. Mom, calling. I stared at it, watched it ring once, then twice, then 3 times. My finger hovered over the screen, but I didn't move. The phone kept ringing. Once, twice, I picked it up. "Hi, Mom." There was a pause, long enough that I thought maybe she hadn't expected me to answer. Then her voice came, sharper than I remembered, clipped like a tight seam about to snap. "You're going to evict us?" No greeting, no hesitation. "After everything we did for Savannah," she added, as if that somehow involved me, as if I hadn't already given enough. I moved to the window, kept my eyes on the yard. Sophie was outside with a bucket of chalk, drawing stars on the cracked concrete like she didn't need the sky's permission. That steadied me more than I expected. "Yes," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I am." I could hear her inhale on the other end, the way she did when trying to hold in disappointment or perhaps make it sting sharper when it came out. "I can't believe this," she said, almost to herself. "You'd take your own mother and sister to court?" I kept my voice even. I wouldn't have to, if respect had been mutual. She barked a laugh. "You always thought respect came with a price tag. That if you threw enough money at us, we'd start praising you." "No," I said. "I thought maybe if I kept showing up, someone would eventually notice. But I'm done waiting to be invited to a table that's never been set for me." She didn't answer right away. "You used to be better than this," she said finally, low and cutting. I looked down at Sophie's chalk drawing. It was the sun now, yellow rays shooting in every direction, bent and messy and beautiful. She was humming. A tune I didn't know, but one I wanted to remember. "Maybe I am," I said. "Maybe I finally am." There was silence. A silence I had grown up learning to navigate. Measured, heavy, passive-aggressive. But this one was different. No apology, no plea to reconsider, no hint of regret, just silence. And then the call ended. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't cry. I didn't even sigh. I just stood there for a while, watching Sophie shift from one drawing to another, completely absorbed in a world she was building one line at a time. That little girl deserved to see her father choose dignity, even if it cost him what little family he had left, even if that meant being cast again as the villain in someone else's story. I checked my inbox. From Clara Pennington, subject, notice served. Her message was short, straight to the point. Certified mail delivered. They have 45 days to respond before formal eviction proceedings can begin. Attached are the scanned documents for your records. It was official now. No longer a thought, no longer a maybe. Emily walked into the kitchen with an envelope in hand. She didn't say anything right away, just held it out to me. "This came for you," she said. "From Dean Myers." I took it. She waited for me to open it, but I didn't, not yet. Some things need a pause. Some moments need to settle before they're unwrapped. The house looked smaller than I remembered. It always did. The siding had faded to a chalky white. The porch rail sagged a little more than the year before, and the red mailbox leaned forward as if it had something to say, but had learned long ago no one wanted to listen. Clara's notice had been delivered 2 days ago. Certified mail. Tracking confirmation signed by someone with neat, round letters, probably Savannah. I imagined her reading the envelope, realizing it wasn't a bill or another medical flyer. Just truth. Folded and legally binding. 45 days to vacate. The house was still mine. Had been for years. The mortgage, the property taxes, the repairs no one remembered to thank me for, all under my name. But standing there, parked across the street in my old truck, it felt like I was trespassing on a life I used to be allowed to belong to. A voice pulled me back. "Didn't think I'd see you here," said Mr. Lyle, my parents' longtime neighbor. He wore the same khaki windbreaker he'd had since I was 12. "Didn't think I'd need to," I said, stepping out of the truck. He nodded. "Heard you're making it official." I didn't answer that. Just slipped my hands in my coat pockets and looked toward the house. "You know they're saying some things," he added carefully. "I'm sure they are." He gave a small shrug, not unfriendly, just unsure. Well, people remember who shows up, even when nobody thanks them for it. I appreciated that more than I let on. After he shuffled back across the street, I sat on the tailgate of my truck for a while. The wind carried the sound of birdsong from somewhere distant. And for a brief second, I thought about walking up those front steps. But I didn't. I'd already crossed the more important threshold. That night, after dinner, I sat in the living room with Sophie, who was building a tower out of couch cushions. Emily was folding laundry nearby, humming faintly. Everything in our house felt ordinary. And for once, that was enough. I opened my phone out of habit, not looking for anything in particular. And there it was, Savannah's social media post. Betrayed by blood. It's always the quiet ones. No names, no tags. But she didn't need to be specific. The words did their job. The comments filled in the blanks. Old classmates, distant cousins. People I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly activated like they'd been waiting for a reason to pick sides. I read it once, then again, and once more, slowly. I didn't comment, didn't message, didn't explain. I didn't need to. Instead, I whispered to myself, And yet, you're still not asking why I left. That had always been the pattern. The hurt didn't come from what they said, it came from what they never bothered to understand. I archived the post, not out of anger, just to keep it from becoming a splinter in a place that had finally begun to heal. Then I checked my inbox. Clara's email was waiting. Subject, update, Sycamore property body. If they don't vacate by the deadline, we'll proceed with formal eviction. No response yet. My chest rose slowly, fell just as slow. Progress, I thought, doesn't always come with celebration. Sometimes it just means no longer hesitating. Emily walked in, holding a letter. "Something came for you," she said. "Handwritten." She handed it to me. The envelope was thick, ivory-colored, slightly bent at the corner. In the upper left corner, Dr. Harold Myers. I held it without opening it. Not yet. Sometimes, the weight of a letter is in the waiting. The envelope from Dean sat on the desk for 3 days before I opened it. Not out of fear, out of respect, maybe. Or the quiet knowledge that some words need time to land right. Inside was a short letter, written in careful penmanship. "Your story stayed with me," he wrote. "Because it isn't just hers, it's ours. For every student, there's someone who stayed quiet and paid the bills. Sometimes the ones in the background hold the whole thing together." Beneath that, he'd listed a handful of contacts: legal aid firms, community development officers, grant writers. He even included a printout, starting a nonprofit 101. Dean didn't use phrases like "make amends" or "rebuild reputation." He didn't pretend to know what I should do next. He just saw me, fully, without expectation or pity. That in itself was rare. I sat at the kitchen table later that night, the letter unfolded beside Emily's steaming mug of chamomile. She read it twice, then again. When she looked up, her expression had shifted. It wasn't just pride. It was something steadier, like she could see where the road might go from here. "This could be more than an ending," she said. "This could be what you're meant to build next." I didn't speak for a long moment. I was staring at Sophie's old crayon drawing, still stuck to the fridge. 3 figures holding hands in front of a bright yellow sun. "If one kid," I finally said, "never has to hear you don't belong again, maybe it's worth it." The next day was warm for early spring. Our school district hosted its annual Staff Appreciation BBQ behind the elementary campus. I wasn't faculty, technically. But as the guy who kept the boilers running and the gym lights from flickering, I got a lanyard and a free sandwich like everyone else. I ran into Terry near the water coolers. Same oil-stained cap, same grease under his fingernails. He looked like comfort. "Harlan?" he grinned, slapping my shoulder. "Heard your sister's got her degree now. Big stuff." I smiled politely. "Yeah, big stuff." He shook his head. "Wild how fast these kids grow up. Mine's already looking at colleges." "Devin?" I asked. "Yep, smart kid. Smarter than me and his mama combined, but..." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Financial aid fell through. Looks like he's gonna sit a year, work full-time, maybe more." I didn't know what to say. Or rather, I knew exactly what I wanted to say. And none of it felt big enough to fix the reality he was facing. That night, after Sophie went to bed, and Emily fell asleep with a book still open across her chest, I pulled out one of my old notebooks. The kind with the wire spirals and smudged corners. I flipped past pages of grocery lists, tool diagrams, scribbled reminders that no longer applied. Then I wrote at the top of a clean sheet, "Devin Carter, Ridgeway Future Fund, Draft 001. Underneath, I listed what I could offer. $500 seed donation from my savings, Dean's letter of recommendation, Emily's help with paperwork, time, and maybe most of all, intention. Not charity, not compensation. Just one man's quiet way of changing the part of the story that had once erased him. Over the next few days, I filled out the 501c3 application. I clicked through government forms that made my head ache, attached Dean's letter, scanned an emission statement Emily helped me wordsmith until it felt both simple and honest. We're not invisible if we make others seen. When I finally hit submit, I sat back in my chair and stared at the confirmation screen like it might vanish. Instead, it blinked once. Application received and pending approval. That was it. No fireworks, no parade. Just one line of text that marked a beginning. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. On day 44, the message came through just after sunrise. They left early this morning. It was from Mr. Lyle, the neighbor across the street. No punctuation, no judgment. Just a simple fact from someone who'd spent his whole life watching without interfering. I stood at the window for a moment, holding my coffee mug, letting the weight of that sentence settle. They were gone. No screaming, no threats, no last-minute calls. Just gone. 2 hours later, Emily, Sophie, and I pulled up in front of the house on Sycamore Street. The porch still groaned under weight that wasn't there. The screen door hung slightly ajar, flapping gently in the breeze. A stray plastic bag twisted in the bushes near the steps, like it had no idea where it came from or where it was supposed to go. I stepped up first. The key turned easily. Too easily, like the lock hadn't fought back in years. Inside, it was quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet. There were no notes, no goodbye, no signs that anyone had tried to explain themselves. The furniture was gone, the pictures removed from the walls, but the outlines remained, rectangular ghosts where frames had once hung. Echoes lived here now, and maybe they always had. Sophie walked in slowly, her eyes wide. "It smells like something old forgot to leave." Emily smiled faintly, running her hand along the faded wallpaper. We let it go when it let go of us. We moved from room to room. The kitchen looked smaller than I remembered. The fridge hummed in a different rhythm now. Upstairs, the carpet in my old bedroom was still worn near the doorframe, the exact spot where I used to pace before job interviews, report cards, and once, a girl named Rachel I never had the courage to call. The master bedroom had been emptied, except for the dresser in the corner. I opened drawers without expecting much. Socks, a broken watch, a bundle of receipts from a hardware store that had closed 10 years ago. Then, in the bottom drawer, under a layer of newspaper clippings, I found it. Dad's old flannel shirt, red and navy, faded, sleeves fraying at the cuffs. I lifted it slowly, like it might tear just from being remembered. It still smelled like motor oil and pine soap. He used to wear it every Saturday morning while fixing things that didn't need fixing. When I was a kid, I thought that's what fathers did. Kept their hands busy so their hearts wouldn't overflow. He used to say, "A man doesn't leave a room last because he's forgotten. He leaves last because he makes sure everyone else is okay first." Back then, I thought he meant the dishes after dinner, the porch light before bed. Now I understood. I folded the shirt carefully and tucked it under my arm. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just felt something shift inside, like a latch that had been stuck for years finally clicked open. Downstairs, Sophie was sketching something on the back of an old envelope. A window, a sun, 3 stick figures. Her version of home never included the pain we were sorting through, only what we had chosen to build. When it was time to leave, I turned the key in the lock and paused. The house was empty. The stories were over. But for the first time, it felt like mine. Not because I wanted it, but because I'd earned the right to walk away on my terms. We walked down the steps. Sophie slipped her hand into mine, and I squeezed it gently. The phone buzzed in my pocket as we reached the truck. I pulled it out. Subject: Devin Carter, awarded scholarship. The library conference room smelled like old paper and new beginnings. You could feel the weight of time in the carpeting, in the scratchy folding chairs, in the dust clinging to the ceiling fan that hadn't been turned on in years. But that day, it felt like something new was happening. Small, yes. Quiet, but real. Devin Carter sat in the front row, shoulders squared, dress shirt too big in the collar, hands folded tightly in his lap. His mother sat beside him, gripping her purse like it might fly away if she let go. I stood to the side, scholarship certificate in my hands. The room was modest. Just a handful of chairs, a table with a stack of cookies someone had donated, and a banner printed from a home office printer. Ridgeway Future Fund, first award ceremony. Emily had helped me hang it earlier that morning. Sophie had colored the corners with little yellow stars. Devin was 17, tall for his age, and spoke like someone who had learned the hard way to choose his words carefully. He stepped up to the front when I nodded to him. No microphone, no podium, just his voice and the space he'd earned. Sometimes, he said, glancing at his mother, then back to the small crowd. All it takes is one person to believe in you. He paused, not for effect, but because the truth needed air before it could be said. For me, that person was someone who paid without needing thanks, who saw something in my future and gave me the chance to reach it. His voice didn't crack. Mine nearly did. I stepped forward. I once funded someone's future, I said, and was told I didn't belong at the celebration. A few heads turned. Emily held Sophie's hand tightly. But today, I continued, I get to make sure someone else does. Devin looked at me, not with gratitude, but with something stronger. Recognition. Like he knew what it meant to feel invisible and what it meant to be seen. I handed him the envelope with the scholarship check. His hands trembled just a little. His mother stood slowly. She didn't speak at first, just reached out and hugged me with a fierceness that caught me off guard. Then she whispered, "Thank you for seeing my boy." Sophie clapped, loud, joyful, without restraint. The sound filled the room like sunlight. And just like that, the silence I'd carried for years began to fade, not disappear, but soften. After the ceremony, we shook hands with the few guests who came. A teacher from Devin's school, a counselor who said, "We've got more kids like him if you're open to it." "I'm open," I said, and I meant it. That night, I sat at the kitchen table again. Same chair, same hum of the refrigerator. But the weight in my chest had changed. Not gone, just rearranged. I looked at Sophie, coloring at the counter. Her ponytail was crooked, her shirt smudged with cookie frosting. She glanced up at me, then back to her drawing. Let her remember this version of me, I thought. Not the man who waited quietly at the edge of someone else's celebration, the one who built something of his own and let others belong in it. By Monday, 3 more applications had come in. Kids I hadn't met yet, stories I hadn't heard. All of them trying, all of them hoping someone, somewhere would believe enough to help them take one step closer. The Ridgeway Future Fund wasn't just an idea anymore. It was real. It breathed. It mattered. Later that night, just as I turned off the kitchen light, my phone buzzed. Voicemail. One message from my mother. The icon blinked on my phone screen. One new voicemail. I sat in the quiet kitchen, early morning light softening the corners of the room. Emily was still upstairs, Sophie likely buried beneath her blankets, one arm dangling off the side of the bed like always. I pressed play. There was a moment of silence before the voice came through. Not the silence of static, but the kind that comes from someone gathering the courage to speak. Then, softly, my mother. Harlan, I don't know if this means anything now, but I'm sorry. For how it ended. For not knowing how to love you out loud. Her voice trembled. Not with weakness, but age. Like someone who had carried something too long and finally couldn't. I thought I was doing the right thing. I really did. And I know it doesn't undo anything. I wanted you to know. The message ended. No demands, no excuses, no asking for a call back. Just that. I stared at the phone for a long while. My thumb hovered over the screen like it could rewind time. Emily walked in, rubbing her eyes. She sat across from me, taking in the stillness. You listened? She asked. I nodded once. She apologized, I said, though the word felt foreign coming from my mouth. Emily tilted her head. Are you going to call her back? I looked out the window. Morning birds were starting their rusted songs, and the old oak tree in our yard swayed gently like it was listening too. No, I said, but I'll answer. Later that day, after Sophie left for school and Emily headed to the office, I sat down at my desk with my phone. No rehearsing, no rewriting, just the truth. I hit record. Hi, Mom. I got your message. I hope you're well. I'm okay now, and I hope one day you are too. I paused, then continued. But I won't go back to being unseen, not even for you. That was it. No accusations. No need to explain what should have been obvious. Some roads aren't meant to be walked back. I hit send. It didn't feel like burning a bridge. It felt like folding the map and choosing a new road, one with less fog, more light. I deleted the voicemail. Not because I wanted to forget it, but because I didn't need to carry it anymore. That afternoon, Emily returned with takeout and a quiet smile. She placed a hand on mine as I unpacked the food. You look different, she said. I feel lighter, I said. Sophie came barreling down the hallway with a drawing in her hands. I made this at school, she declared. It was simple. Crayon and construction paper, 3 stick figures, one tall, one with long hair, one small, all holding hands, a red heart drawn between them. She'd drawn our house too, crooked but cozy, and beneath it she'd written, my family, where I belong. I held the drawing like it was made of glass. She didn't know the weight those words carried, or maybe she did. I placed it on the fridge, right next to the scholarship photo of Devin and his mother. There, side by side, 2 testaments to what it looked like when people chose to show up. The doorbell rang. I opened it to find a stack of mail in the box, most of it routine. One envelope stood out, handwritten, heavy, Devin Carter return address scribbled neatly on the back. I turned it over once, twice. Some letters you don't rush. Devin's handwriting was uneven, but bold. The envelope had been sitting on the kitchen counter all morning. I'd passed it 3 times before finally opening it. Once after pouring my coffee, once while checking the weather, and once for no reason at all. The first line made me stop. Dear Mr. Ridgway, I got in. Just those 5 words. But they carried the kind of weight I remembered from when I was 17 and holding a letter of my own, hands shaking, reading the words I wasn't sure I deserved. Emily came into the kitchen just as I sat down. "You're opening it?" she asked. I handed her the letter. "Read it to me." She unfolded the page carefully, her voice gentle but steady. "Dear Mr. Ridgway, I got into Tennessee State. Biomedical engineering. Full admission. They said my application stood out, not just because of my grades, but because someone believed in me enough to put their name behind mine." She paused, glanced up at me, then kept going. "You didn't owe me anything, but I owe you everything. I don't know what to say except thank you, and I won't waste what you gave me." I promise I looked out the window for a long moment. The sky was still gray with morning, but I swear it felt brighter. I wasn't used to this part. The response, the echo. For so long I'd spoken into silence, paid bills that vanished into voids, gave without ever being named. This was different. This mattered. Sophie wandered in from the hallway, hair tangled from sleep, still in her pajamas. She held something behind her back. "What's that?" I asked. She pulled it out with a grin. A frame, white wood, decorated with stickers. Inside, a copy of the Ridgway Future Fund check, printed and mounted neatly behind the glass. "I made it at school," she said. "It's for your desk." I took it from her like it was made of porcelain. "This is cooler than any metal," she added proudly. I didn't tell her how much that meant. I didn't have to. Later that day, I walked into my small office, the one I used to just pass through to pay bills, store receipts, and keep memories folded up in drawers I didn't open. Now it looked different. Devin's letter went up on the wall, right above my desk. Right beside it, I pinned a blank sheet of paper. At the top, in pen, I wrote, "Next student." No name yet, just space and intention. That afternoon, while organizing an old file box I hadn't touched in years, I found a folder marked Spring 2007. Probably from when I moved out. I opened it without much thought. Near the bottom, stuck between 2 faded permission slips and a half-torn utility bill, was a photograph I didn't remember existing. Me, Dad, and Savannah, standing in front of the house on Sycamore Street. He had one hand on my shoulder, the other holding Savannah's tiny palm. We were smiling, all 3 of us. Not the posed, forced kind, but something more natural, caught in the in-between. I stared at it for a long time. I couldn't remember who took the photo, or even the day it was taken. But there we were. Not a perfect family, not even a functional one, but something real, something that once tried. I held the photo in my hand and wondered if Dad ever felt the way I did now, like maybe he had spent too much time standing just off to the side, hoping someone would turn and notice. And then I wondered if maybe, for him, that had been enough. But it wasn't enough for me, not anymore. I drove alone, just me and the early October air, the trees along the highway starting to swap their greens for rust and gold. The kind of quiet ride where the hum of tires becomes background music to thoughts you've been avoiding. The road to the cemetery was familiar in a way that unsettled me. Not because I came often, but because I'd driven it so many times in my head. It had been over a decade since I last visited Dad's grave. I parked near the far end, beneath a willow that drooped with the weariness of something that had seen too much. The marble headstone was clean. Someone had kept it that way. Not Savannah. Maybe Mom. Maybe the groundskeepers. The name was simple. James Harold Ridgway, 1949 to 2009. No inscription, no quote, just the facts. I stood there for a while, hands in my jacket pockets, the wind tugging gently at my sleeves. The air felt heavier here, not oppressive, just weighted, like the silence had a body of its own. I pulled the photo from my coat pocket, the one I found in the folder last week. Me, Dad, Savannah. Standing in front of the old house. We were younger, unknowing. He had one hand on my shoulder, the other wrapped around Savannah's tiny fingers. I hadn't known that photo existed until it landed in my hands. And now, I couldn't stop seeing it. I knelt down and placed it under a smooth, flat stone near the edge of the headstone. Not as a tribute, not as a guilt offering, just a marker of what had been, and what I was ready to let go of. You used to say, I whispered, that a man finishes last so everyone else can leave first. I looked up at the trees swaying behind the graves. Well, I continued, I did that. I stood last in every room, at every table. I paid first and spoke last. I carried silence like it was inheritance. A pause, not dramatic, just honest. But now I'm choosing something else. I'm choosing to lead, not from behind, not from shadows, but forward, out loud. I stood, brushed the dust from my knees. I didn't expect a feeling. But one came anyway. Not relief, peace. The kind that doesn't shout its presence, but simply no longer needs to be explained. I drove back into town just in time for Sophie's school event. Community Impact Day. Emily had already set up the Ridgeway Future Fund table. A poster board stood beside her with photos from our first scholarship award, newspaper clippings, and a heading in Sophie's handwriting. Helping good kids go further. There were bowls of candy, a sign-up sheet for volunteers, and a glass jar with folded slips of encouragement from other students. Sophie was wearing a badge she'd made from construction paper that read, Dad's biggest fan. I stood behind the table with them for a while, handing out flyers, answering quiet questions from curious parents. No one asked who I was related to. They just asked, how do I apply? And that was enough. Toward the end of the event, a woman in a denim blazer approached, clipboard in hand, official badge around her neck. Mr. Ridgeway? She asked. I nodded. I'm with the Franklin Gazette, she said, smiling. We're nominating you for this year's Local Light Award. It's for individuals who've made a lasting impact on their communities. She waited, pen ready. Do you accept? I glanced down at Sophie, who gave me a double thumbs up. I looked back at the woman and said, Sure. Why not? Some things you don't need to think twice about. The auditorium buzzed with chatter and folding chairs, the unmistakable sound of community coming together, imperfect but present. The kind of noise that fills small-town buildings during school concerts, spelling bees, and, in this case, Community Honors Night. I stood near the back, hands folded in front of me, watching Sophie at the front of the stage. She wore a paper medal that said, Hope Leader, glittered with crooked letters and tape that barely held. But you'd have thought it was gold. Emily sat in the second row, waving proudly each time Sophie glanced her way. Devon sat a few seats over, dress shirt slightly too big again, but with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there a few months ago. He was next on the program. When the MC called his name, Devon walked to the microphone with calm steps. Not rushed, not nervous, just ready. He looked at the crowd, cleared his throat, then said, Harlan Ridgeway once paid someone's way and was told he didn't belong. So he made sure others could. It was quiet after that, Not stunned silence, resonant silence. He nodded once and stepped down. I didn't expect applause, and that's probably why it meant more when it came. Gentle at first, then full. Not for me, but for the idea, for what it stood for. When it was my turn, I walked up slowly. I hadn't prepared a speech. I didn't need one. I used to think giving quietly was enough, I said. That showing up without asking for recognition was noble. I looked out at the crowd, not people I grew up with, not family, but people who had chosen to be here. But silence without respect? I continued. That's erasure, and I won't pass that down. Not to Sophie, not to anyone. I paused. Now I speak, not loudly, but clearly. And I act, not because I need to be seen, but because I finally know what matters. When I stepped down, Sophie ran up to me, arms outstretched. They said my dad is a community builder, she whispered. I knelt beside her, smiled. Only because I stopped being their crutch, I said, and built something that could stand on its own. The evening blurred in that soft way certain memories do. No single moment tried to be more important than the others. People shook my hand. Someone offered to connect me to a grant writer. A teacher asked if I'd speak at their next parent night. I didn't feel like an imposter. I didn't feel like a hero either. Just a man who kept showing up. Later that night, back at home, Emily placed a folder on the kitchen table. You got something in the mail? She said. Checks from a donor in Nashville. Unrestricted funds, enough to cover 3 new students. I sat down slowly, looked at Sophie, already drawing something at the end of the table. She held up her latest creation. It's us again, she said. But bigger. 3 stick figures, drawn with bolder lines this time. A red heart above them, stretching across the whole sky. Below it, in capital letters, she'd written, You belong. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Because somewhere along the way, the story had changed. From you don't belong here, words that had once closed doors, to this. A child's handwriting, a picture of a family that wasn't perfect, but present. And a truth I had earned through every quiet, steady step. I belong. I used to think family was a place you were born into. Something stamped into your skin like a birthmark, unchosen and unchanging. But as the years wore on, I've come to believe it's more like a garden. You can inherit soil, sure, but what grows? That part's up to you. There are still quiet mornings when I catch myself waiting for approval, for apology, for someone to say, you were right to walk away. But the truth is, I stopped needing that. Somewhere between Sophie's drawing and Devin's letter, I realized that the most powerful kind of belonging is the kind you create, not the kind you're given. In our little house in Franklin, with its squeaky floorboards and backyard full of chalk dust, I found something better than recognition. I found peace. Not the kind that comes from everyone clapping for you, but the kind that sits in your chest like a steady heartbeat. A peace that says, you didn't fix the past, but you chose a better future. Every now and then, I pass by the old house on Sycamore Street. The porch still leans, the paint still peels, but it doesn't pull me back anymore, because I'm no longer standing in the background, waiting to be called forward. I'm already walking, steady, sure. And finally, for myself. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for your family is to set a boundary. Not out of anger, but out of respect for yourself. Silence isn't always strength. And giving without recognition doesn't make you noble. It makes you invisible. Speak clearly, live honestly, and choose to build the kind of life where dignity doesn't need to be demanded. It's lived. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel. We share heartfelt stories just like this. Stories of healing, quiet courage, and finding your place. There's always another chapter waiting.